So there's a very interesting development coming out of the United States. Donald Trump, the president, has signed an executive order, as he's been doing since he took over, and he's directed the Department of Justice to pause enforcing the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Now, what does this law say? Why has he paused it? And what is the connection for those of us in India? That's the breakdown I'm going to give you in this very quick story. Now, this law effectively prohibits American companies or companies that do business in America from bribing any foreign official of a foreign country to obtain or retain business. And this was a law that came about 50 years ago. It's dated, I think, 1977. Now, this law is enforced by the DOJ. The DOJ is basically the chief law enforcing arm of the United States government, the FBI, the DA that looks after narcotics. All of this comes under the Department of Justice. The Attorney General heads the Department of Justice and is the chief law enforcement officer. There's a new Attorney General called Pam Bondi who's just been appointed by the Trump government. Now, this is Trump's justification for making this move. He says, the law sounds good on paper, but in practicality, it's a disaster. And I'm quoting him here. He said, it means that if an American goes to a foreign country and starts doing business there, legally, legitimately, or otherwise, it is almost guaranteed to be an investigation or an indictment, and nobody wants to do business with Americans because of it. Now, I want to remind you that under this law, there's a possible punishment of 15 years in prison, a fine of $250,000, or 3 times the equivalent of the bribe that was demanded or paid. And last year, so 2024, the DOJ brought about 24 cases under this law for violation of this law. Now, the order that Trump has signed basically says to the Attorney General Pam Bondi to review this law completely, review its guidelines, review its policies for the next 180 days, so 6 months. And during this period, cease initiation of any new cases and enforcement of cases that are already there. So, any case that already exists or indictment that has already been brought is now frozen for 6 months at least. Why is this interesting? Now, the FCPA is at the heart of the case that the American government brought against the Adani group, specifically Gautam Adani and his nephew Sagar Adani. And this pause is being seen as a massive relief for the Adani group, at least for the next 6 months. We don't know what the DOJ will do after 6 months, but at least for 6 months, it's a huge sigh of relief and a reason to smile for Gautam Adani. Now, quick reminder as to what that case was, right? Last year, under President Joe Biden, the DOJ charged Adani for a scheme to pay 2,100 crore rupees or 50 million US dollars as a bribe to Indian officials for Indian power contracts or solar power contracts. Now, we all paused at that point and said, hey, this is an Indian company or a businessman and you're talking about Indian officials and bribes for power plants in India. What does America have to do with it? Now, the DOJ accusation basically said that the company raised money from US banks and investors and concealed this alleged fact. At that point, the Adani group called this case completely baseless. Now, a quick sidestep. Another thing has happened today in the US. 6 US Republican congressmen have written to the new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and have basically told her to re-look at the DOJ indictment against the Adani group in this specific case. Now, this is what they have said. They have criticized the DOJ's actions and said this was a misguided crusade and it risks damaging US-India relations. There's an article in the Business Standard, you can take a look at it. Now, what they have said is, and I'm quoting, they have said that the case is based on claims of members of a company engaged in bribery in Indian officials in India. So rather than deferring this to the Indian authorities, the Biden DOJ pressed ahead with charges against this company despite no direct harm for America. They also contended that, there's no compelling reason to pursue legal action, and what this effectively does, and this is what they've said, the misguided campaign risks harming our relationship with a crucial geopolitical partner just before President Trump returns to the Oval Office. So, 6 Republican congressmen are effectively from Trump's party, and this is what they've said. They've said that you should actually defer this directly to the Indian officials to look at it. Why are we bringing charges? Now, while this has happened, I want to remind you that back home, the Sensex actually fell 1,000 points because of a possibility of a trade war with the US. So that's a little over 1.3%. But Adani stocks have gone up 4.5% on the BSE. So Adani Enterprises, Power, Green Energy have actually climbed and surged against the market today. And that's been a positive impact. So there's a relief there for the Adani Group companies. In the meantime, globally, there is a anti-corruption watchdog called Transparency International. They have said that the particular law that we're talking about, the FCPA, made the United States a leader in battling global corruption, but this new executive order could pave the way, and I'm quoting, for completely eliminating the crown jewel in the fight against global corruption. Now, we'll have to see if America decides to defer this to Indian authorities and whether the Indian authorities will take it up. So, for example, the question did arise at that point that if an indictment had been served and if the company already knew it was being indicted, why hasn't SEBI asked whether or not it was declared to Indian investors? So, all these questions still remain. But on the other hand, there is another development that's taking place. Our Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, will meet Donald Trump tomorrow while he visits the US. Reuters basically has said that the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump will aim to avoid a trade war-like situation that our stock market is currently reacting to. And they're quoting an unnamed official on the Reuters report. And remember, it comes at a time when Trump is actually threatening tariffs across many countries, and India wants to avoid that situation. Reuters has basically said that ahead of this visit of the Prime Minister, India is prepared to cut tariffs in order to encourage more American exports to come into India to avoid that potential trade war. Now, Reuters is quoting unnamed government sources. The Hindustan Times has a similar story saying India is planning tariff cuts, but it also says that there's no official confirmation about this from either the Trade Ministry, the Foreign Ministry, or the Prime Minister's office. But I do want to remind you that in the union budget that was just announced by the Finance Minister Sitharaman, India already slashed customs duties on motorcycles coming from the US, on cars, from smartphones. So effectively, this will give a boost to American companies like Harley-Davidson, like Tesla, and Apple. So already some signs being sent to the President Donald Trump, but a difficult sort of tightrope walk for India, because the more you cut tariffs and allow American products to come into India, the more pressure it will put on Indian companies and our idea of becoming Atmanirbhar. So there's a tricky situation developing there, and all of these things happening at the same time. So the things to watch out for is the Prime Minister's visit to the US and what will come out of that conversation. For now, a massive relief for the Adani Group. We'll have to see whether Indian law enforcement takes it up at all. Leave me a comment right now on what your reaction is to Donald Trump's latest executive order and what you expect will happen in the news wheel over the rest of the week.